Hello, and welcome to the Citrix CCA certification package. I'm Greg Shields. Over the next few hours, we're going to get to know a lot about each other. We're going to learn a lot about Citrix and how we can use Citrix to solve problems in our IT environment. How we can use Citrix and terminal services to reach out, to extend our networks to across the world or across the country or even just across the office so that we can bring people together to work in on a central server and store all of those applications back in our data center. More importantly, though, we're going to teach you over the next few hours the skills that you need to pass that CCA exam. Because that's why you bought this CBT nugget, because you want to be a CCA. And who'd want to blame you? Being a CCA is pretty cool. Let me start out by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm actually a CCEA, a Certified Citrix Enterprise Admin. And I'm also a triple MCSE, so I've been around the block. I've played with this technology for a long time, and hopefully I can use some of the experiences that I've had over the years also to kind of give you some idea of what settings work and what settings don't work. So not only are you going to be able to get information about specifically what you need to pass the CCA, but also some good anecdotal information for, this setting doesn't work that well, or, you might want to do this. Hopefully that together we can help to take some of that anecdotal information and also what you need to know for the test to make it successful for you. If this is your first time ever doing a CBT with CBT Nuggets, you'll probably notice that things are a little bit different than what you're probably used to with a lot of these computer-based trainings. The first of which is that we don't really have this sense of death by PowerPoint. You're not going to be flashing up a lot of these PowerPoint slides and putting you to sleep over the next few hours. That's really not the reason why we do this. We actually have an entire Citrix network set up that we're going to talk about extensively. We're going to go through lots of demonstrations. We're going to actually click the buttons and watch what happens during each step of the process. So you're not actually reading off a PowerPoint every time. You're learning actively, and potentially you could even be doing this if you set up this network at home. And later on in this particular nugget, I'm going to show you what the network is that we've set up here so that you could potentially also set this up in your environment and we can play along. You can read along as I read aloud. So what are we going to talk about in this particular nugget? This is the introduction to both Citrix and the CCA. We've talked a lot about why are we here. You want to get a CCA, and it's my job to give you as much information as you can and make you successful into that test. And hopefully we're going to be able to do that over the next few hours. We're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of Citrix certifications out there. The CCA is really the foot in the door for Citrix certifications. There are a number of other certifications that are out there, and more tests and more learning will get you to those higher level of certifications. There are also some prerequisites for the CCA, and we'll just generally go through what those prerequisites are and how they will help you. Also the objectives for the test. This is probably the most important part of this particular nugget, is exactly what are we going to be talking about throughout all of these nuggets, and we want to align all of this learning within all of these nuggets to the objectives for that test. I want to talk about just this little Citrix network that we've set up here. So if you have an interest in following along, you can build that network as well and click the buttons while we're clicking the buttons here inside of the demonstrations, and also give you some additional resources. This CBT has got a lot of useful information, but there may be some additional information in these additional resources that may be of use to you. So we've talked about why are we here. Again, nice to meet you. My name is Greg Shields. My wife is Eloise. My dog's name is Lily. Occasionally she barks from time to time, and so I apologize if she barks. But anyway, we've talked about why are we here. Let's talk about the Citrix certifications. Let me minimize this window here, and I'm going to bring up the next window. We're going to talk about just the different kinds of certifications available through Citrix. The very top level here, we have the CCA, and I have the little box here because the CCA is a single exam. That exam number is 1YO256. Or the full name is Citrix Presentation Server 4.0 Administration. Now, taking this exam gets you the CCA. That's just the start of your Citrix learning. If you want to jump into the next level of Citrix learning, and that's after going through this CBT and moving on through the next CBTs, there's also the Certified Citrix Enterprise Admin, which adds a whole lot more tests. There's 4 more exams. There's 1YO258, which is Citrix Presentation Server 4 Support. There's 1YO306, which is the Citrix Access Gateway. There's 1YO326, which is the password manager. And then there's also this particularly nasty exam, this 1YO456 exam, which is Citrix Access Suite Build and Test. That one's actually a simulation exam, and the early reports of it is that it's pretty difficult. Additionally, we have this one e-learning module here that you'll have to complete, and that's the Citrix Access Suite 4.0 Common Management Platform Administration. And all of these are prerequisites for that CCEA. The jump from CCEA to CCIA adds 2 more exams to that. Those are 1YO613 and 1YO614. 1YO613 is Citrix Access Suite Analysis, and 1YO614 is Citrix Access Suite Design. Both of those are more difficult exams designed at a very high level approach to take you from the requirements development all the way through to the end analysis and implementation of the project. So the idea is the CCA is intended as an implementor, the CCEA is intended as an engineer, if you will, and the CCIA is intended as a high level person that's doing a lot of large scope Citrix implementations. Down here are these two little boxes as well, and those for the CCSP and the CCI. Those are the Citrix Certified Sales Professional and Citrix Certified Instructor. If you're not an instructor and you're not a sales guy, you're probably not going to have any interest in either of these two exams. But most importantly for today, what you're interested in is this CCA here. That's what we've got to get through before we can get to any of the other things. So let's move out of here and let's talk specifically about the prerequisites. Now, these prerequisites are those that are recommended by Citrix, and you may not necessarily have to have these prerequisites, but you probably already do have them. That's the concept of basic Windows 2003 server administration. Can you navigate through the GUI? Do you have an idea what the difference is between my computer and my network places, those sorts of things? Assumedly, if you're picking up this CCA CBT nugget, you probably have some sense of Windows 2003 server administration capabilities. This basic network administration here, and you'll have out here, can you spell TCP/IP? But seriously, what they're talking about, can you log on? Can you log off? Can you create new users and change permissions? Can you navigate throughout the system? The basic stuff that you need in order just to get yourself around the network. And arguably, you probably have this as well. Now, an more important one here is this multi-user application installation capability. And that's the idea of, do you have the knowledge of how to install applications into a multi-user, multi-session environment? Now, if you've been using terminal services before, then you're probably familiar with this. Some applications have different requirements when they're installed into these multi-user environments. And it's important to have those skills. We have a whole nugget coming up later on about how to do these application installs in multi-user environments. So if you don't have those, we're going to talk about those in a later CBT Nuggets. Now, one of the other prerequisites is the idea of network management with SNMP. And if you don't have SNMP skills, don't worry, don't stress, because you really need to know just the concepts, the very basic and general ideas of what is SNMP and what is it used for, how is it useful to you on your network. And lastly, this basic Citrix administration. And they say 6 months of Citrix administration, but really, have you used Citrix? Are you comfortable with the Citrix Management Console? Are you comfortable with the Access Suite console? Assuming that you've at least installed Citrix once, or at least have had to use the Citrix console for a few times before, you probably have the very basic skills you need in order to pass this exam. Honestly, what's really even more important about this basic Citrix administration skills is really not so much for the exam, but for the examples that we're going to be going throughout this CBT. We're going to assume that at least you've seen certain things before. So having those skills is probably going to be pretty helpful as we go through the demonstrations throughout all the CBT nuggets. The next slide here is the CCA objectives. Now I'm going to come right out and say the CCA is not a difficult exam. It's also really not a tricky exam. If you understand the user interfaces, if you understand where all the buttons are and where all the settings are configured, you're most of the way there at this point. If you really can, in the back of your mind, if you can really just sort of memorize, if you will, all of the screens and what the screens do and what all the capability is within all the screens, you're most of the way towards what you need to know for the CCA. I've copied this actually from what's called the CCA Enablement Guide, which is a guide that Citrix puts out that explains what you need to know to pass the exam. And in here it gives the percentages of each of these skills that are required in order to do well for the CCA exam. You'll see here that, well, let me just go through these one by one. The first one is Applied and Architectural Concepts for Presentation Server. And the idea here is that you need to have an understanding of what the different pieces are that make up Presentation Server, all the different components that make up Presentation Server, and how they interrelate. If you have a good understanding of of what the difference is between Installation Manager, between Resource Manager, and what Load Manager does, what all these different components do, then you're going to do well within this particular section. The next one's pretty basic, installing and managing Citrix Presentation Server. If you have an idea how to install Citrix and also the basic management of the Citrix Management Console, you're going to do just fine with this. You'll notice that's a full 10% for this. For the next segment, we talk about configuring farm settings. And configuring farm settings is really inside of the CMC, how do you configure the settings that are for the entire farm, not necessarily for particular systems. And understanding what all of the settings are when you right-click on the farm and choose properties, understanding what they do and where they're located at will do you very well for this particular section. Under configuring ICA sections, this is actually configuring the ICA sessions themselves, how to actually configure the applications, the ICA communication back and forth between the client and the server. That's what's going to help you for this particular section. Policies are actually pretty big. Policies are the idea of, I want to set, similar to group policies, I want to set Citrix policies that mandate certain configurations for my servers. Publishing applications and content. That's really the second half, if you will, of installing the application. First, you've got to install the application, and then you've got to publish it in order to make it available to your users. And there are correct ways to do that. And this section talks a lot about those ways that we will publish applications, and also publishing content, which is not really an application. It's more like we're publishing access to a resource. That's in this particular section. For deploying applications, we're talking specifically about Installation Manager. Now, installing an individual application on an individual Citrix server isn't really all that difficult, unless it's a problematic application. But if you're installing many applications to many Citrix servers, then Installation Manager is a tool that you can use to automate that process. And in deploying applications, you'll need to learn how Installation Manager can help you actually deploy those applications. The next one's managing loads. And that's kind of a fun one. If you have a small number of Citrix servers, let's say you have 2 Citrix servers and they're equally the same, it's probably pretty easy to load balance between the two. But let's say you have 200 and they're different chassis types and they're a different resource load on any particular server. Well, managing those can get very difficult depending on how large size your farm is and what the different types of hardware equipment is inside that farm. So you'll need to know that as well. You'll notice here that printing is very high percentage of printing inside of the CCA. That's because printing has historically within Citrix been a challenging thing to set up. And we'll talk a lot about how best to configure printing for your Citrix environment. The last two are enabling and securing access to to published applications and content. And that's the idea of web interface. In allowing your users to connect into web interface or into program neighborhood agent to enumerate their applications. That's here under web access. And also securing talks about the different security tools that are available within Citrix to lock down that communication from the Citrix server to the Citrix client. Again, the text and the percentage distribution of the skills needed for the CCA, all this comes directly out of the CCA enablement guide that comes from Citrix. But if you look at the different nuggets, the titles of those nuggets that are available in this series, they align sort of with these percentages. So we're going to try to align our learning with what are the objectives for the exams. That's why we're talking specifically about what these are. So keep an eye on these and also keep an eye on the future titles as we go through each title so you can align what you're learning with what you need to know. So those are the objectives. The next thing we want to talk about is the actual lab configuration itself. You'll see that what we've got here is what is quite possibly the worst possible triangle ever drawn in the history of man. That being said, though, that triangle is here to identify what is the domain that we're using. Our domain is nuggetlab.com, and inside of this triangle are 3 servers. Actually 2. We're going to add the third one in a future nugget. We have a DC here, a domain controller that handles the domain controllers and WINs and DNS and all that stuff called DC Nugget. We also have this Citrix server here, CTX Nugget 1. Later on, that's why I have it in dots here, we have another Citrix server that will come online called CTX Nugget 2, and we'll add that server in a little bit later. And then we also have this little workstation. This is my icon here for a workstation, and this workstation is Nugget 1. So if you're going to follow along throughout this entire series and you want to create your own infrastructure, you can create an infrastructure similar to this. Perhaps you use a virtualization technology or something to create it inside of your workstation. But these are the 4 machines that we're going to be talking about throughout this entire series so we can install Citrix to it and deploy applications to it and run web interface all off of these boxes. Moving on to our last component, we want to talk a little bit about what additional resources are available to you. Once you get done with this nugget, what else would you probably at least want to scan through before you take the test? The first of which is obviously the Citrix Presentation Server Administration Guide. This is the biggest of them. It's a number of 100 pages in size, and it gives you the exact step-by-step what you need to do to accomplish all the tasks inside of Citrix Presentation Server. It's really good, and it's actually something you should have in your quiver, if you will, that you can pull out whenever you need to know how to do something. Also, the Load Manager and Installation Manager and Resource Manager admin guides are handy for those particular technologies. If you're having problems figuring out how to do Load Manager or what the switches are for Installation Manager, keep those admin guides handy as well. Also, the Web Interface admin guide is useful if you're configuring Web Interface. Web Interface has a lot of different configurations, both at the command line and also inside of the GUI, so having this admin guide is also handy for you. And as you're deploying clients, having the Client for 32-bit Windows admin guide is handy for you as well, because it provides a lot of specific information for how to deploy the clients properly. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We're gonna learn a lot together. First of all, we're not going to have to read those instruction manuals from start to finish and try to decipher when it says click next, and turn that into actual activity. I don't know about you, but for me, it's hard to learn. I learn by seeing and by doing. And that's what's really great about how we have these CBTs set up. So what have we talked about in this particular nugget, though? We did our introductions. Again, it's very nice to meet you. We talked about the Citrix certifications and how the CCA really is just the first step in your path to Citrix learning. We talked about both the prerequisites and the objectives that you need to know in order to take the test. We talked about how the network is set up and what each of the machines are that we're going to be using throughout this the rest of this CBT, and also some additional resources that may come in handy for you as you complete your learning. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.